In the calm of early morning, the English Channel shimmered beneath a slate-gray sky. Aboard the HMS Defender, a Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer, the crew moved with practiced precision. Coffee steamed in the wardroom, radar operators murmured quietly in their stations, and the hum of the ship's systems was a familiar comfort. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Niven stood on the bridge, her gaze trained on the sea. For her, this deployment was routine. Standard patrol, joint exercises, nothing more. Or so it seemed. A subtle shift in tone came first, not from the crew but from the machines. A blip on the radar, faint and fleeting, flickered into existence off the starboard bow. Petty Officer Reese Collier narrowed his eyes, adjusting the frequency, running diagnostics. Another contact appeared, then a third. Moments later, a cluster of unidentified vessels emerged on the screen, moving in tight formation. They weren't transmitting standard AIS, automatic identification system signals, not commercial, not civilian. These ships were military. "Confirm visual," Niven ordered, and within minutes, binoculars and targeting optics confirmed the radar's story. Sleek gray hulls slicing the water, unfamiliar lines and markings catching the light. The Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, had entered the channel. This was unexpected, unusual, unannounced. The proximity wasn't just provocative, it was calculated. Chinese warships operating this far from home in one of the most heavily monitored maritime corridors in the world, without notice or coordination, raised alarms well beyond the defender's deck. Niven immediately alerted the chain of command. Back in Portsmouth, senior officers scrambled. Across the Thames, intelligence analysts began feeding data to Downing Street. But on the bridge, the mood remained taut, focused, alert. To able seaman Dean McCarthy, fresh from his first deployment, the encroaching silhouettes felt more surreal than threatening. He'd studied China's naval rise during training. He'd seen videos, read briefings. But witnessing those ships up close, silent, sharp, almost ghost-like, carried a weight no textbook could replicate. The Defender maintained course and speed, projecting calm professionalism. But inside, the ship braced. Deck crew ran silent drills. Damage control teams rehearsed containment procedures. The weapons division double-checked configurations without broadcasting a change in posture. There was no aggression, no broadcast from the plan ships, just a creeping assertion of presence, calculated proximity without communication. Captain Thomas Arkwright joined Niven on the bridge, boots echoing with authority. He was a man of few words, a veteran of both NATO operations and silent cold water standoffs. He scanned the formation before them, calculating options. The Defender had right-of-way, sovereignty of position, and international law on its side. But law meant little at sea if misread intentions sparked fire. 3 destroyers, he said, and a support vessel. Likely Type 05 2Ds. "What's the play, sir?" Niven asked. "We watch. We stay ready. We do not blink." Far below deck, the mood shifted from idle routine to something closer to anticipation. In the sonar room, operator Kemi Aluko adjusted filters to monitor subsurface contacts. If surface vessels were bold enough to approach in broad daylight, who could say what moved beneath? China had never pushed this far into British waters. Their ships often shadowed exercises in the Pacific, monitored freedom of navigation ops near Taiwan, but this was close to home. The channel wasn't just busy, it was vital. A maritime artery for Europe, with surveillance layered over it like armor. Any maneuver here was not accidental. The plan vessels maintained a parallel course, just far enough to avoid outright violation, but close enough that their message couldn't be missed. Cameras on the Defender's deck tracked every angle. Thermal imaging noted crew movements aboard the Chinese ships, but even at this range, the opposing decks seemed strangely still. Like statues, they watched, waiting. Arkwright ordered a secure line to London. "This is intentional," he said. "They're not shadowing. They're showcasing." Back in the crew quarters, murmurs spread. Sailors speculated. Was this political theater? A test of resolve? A glitch in diplomacy? McCarthy sat beside Aluko in the mess, the air filled with tension disguised as silence. No alarms sounded, no guns were raised, but the pressure was undeniable. In naval warfare, the quietest moments often held the greatest threat. As nightfall approached, the tension refused to lift. The Chinese ships lit no deck lights. The Defender, per protocol, maintained minimal emissions, drifting closer to radio silence. The only illumination came from the moon and the stars, a stark, cold theater of modern confrontation. And then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the planned ships began to adjust course. One by one, they peeled away, steering southward, leaving a long wake of churned black water behind. They hadn't spoken a word. Niven exhaled, not relief, just the end of one unknown. Arkwright remained quiet, eyes still on the horizon. "This won't be the last time," he said. In London, phones continued to ring. In Beijing, someone marked a box on a classified report. Presence demonstrated, reaction measured. And in the Channel, the waves rolled on, as if nothing had happened. The morning after the tense standoff in the English Channel, HMS Defender continued its patrol with a sharpened sense of vigilance. Though the Chinese ships had slipped away into the darkness, their presence still lingered like a ghost across the ship's decks. Every radar ping felt heavier, every sonar sweep more deliberate. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Niven scanned the horizon again and again, as if the act alone might keep new shadows at bay. In the operations room, the tempo had shifted. Data was no longer routine, it was intelligence. What had initially seemed like a passive encounter now unraveled into something deeper. Communications intercepted between satellite uplinks hinted that the Chinese vessels were part of a broader maneuver, not an isolated patrol. Naval intelligence had picked up chatter suggesting simultaneous movements in the Mediterranean and even the North Sea. The realization was unsettling. The Channel incident might have been part of a coordinated global message. Captain Thomas Arkwright took the matter to heart. He'd seen similar tactics before: probes, strategic posturing, subtle challenges to the maritime status quo. But this one felt different. It was audacious, brazen, right on Britain's doorstep. In a secure briefing with his senior officers, Arkwright made it clear the mission had changed. The Defender wasn't just on patrol anymore, it was the front line of an unfolding naval chess match. Below deck, able seaman Dean McCarthy struggled to sleep. The previous day's tension replayed in his mind, every metallic clank and engine rumble feeding his unease. He found himself in the ship's small chapel, an unexpected sanctuary for such a hardened machine of war. There he met Chief Petty Officer Lorna Patel, who had seen her share of flashpoints during her years across the fleet. She shared stories, not to soothe him, but to prepare him. "The sea tests your nerves," she said, "but it's the silence before the storm that makes or breaks you." That silence didn't last long. On the second evening, as the Defender approached the southwestern end of the channel near Ushant, another anomaly registered. A commercial cargo ship, the Valerie M, bound for Rotterdam, had reported an escort-like shadow off its port side. The ship's captain, puzzled and nervous, described a gray-hulled vessel with no markings, maintaining distance but mirroring their every move. Maritime surveillance confirmed the presence of a Chinese frigate, not part of the original group. What began as a calculated show of force was now evolving into something more intricate. Multiple assets, separated by hundreds of nautical miles, seemed to be acting in concert. Arkwright recognized the pattern, shaping the narrative through ambiguity, probing Western reaction without tipping into direct confrontation. But ambiguity at sea is a dangerous game. The defender was ordered to close the distance to the Valerie M. Niven plotted the course, keeping communications secure and eyes forward. As night fell, the British warship's wake shimmered beneath the moonlight. There was no doubt now, this wasn't over. As they approached, the Chinese vessel shifted again. It veered, circled, then vanished into the black expanse of the Atlantic. Niven watched the radar screen blank itself like a magician's trick. These ships were trained in stealth, emissions control, masking their signatures, operating like shadows. But stealth did not mean innocence. Aboard the Defender, every department was mobilized. Engineering reinforced quiet-running modes. Weapon systems remained hot but silent. The medical bay prepped for contingencies. Arkwright refused to let this provoke them into a mistake, but he was equally unwilling to be caught off guard. On the intelligence channel, encrypted messages arrived from Whitehall. The Foreign Office was considering issuing a diplomatic warning, while NATO Command quietly reassigned a second vessel to reinforce the channel. Across the board, the stakes were rising. In the mess hall, the crew sensed the shift in mood. Conversations were quieter. Laughter was rarer. Even those not on duty kept half an ear to the comms, wondering if the next alert would mark the beginning of something bigger. Chief Patel ran impromptu readiness drills. She kept the crew sharp, not because she expected an immediate fight, but because readiness bred confidence. "It's not fear that breaks people," she told McCarthy during one of the drills. "It's not knowing what comes next." By the third day, the channel seemed to return to normal. Commercial traffic resumed. Fishing vessels dotted the horizon. But aboard Defender, no one believed the threat was over. Surveillance drones had captured a long-range image of a Chinese surveillance aircraft near the Bay of Biscay. This wasn't coincidence. It was pressure. Captain Arkwright stood alone on the bridge, watching the sea move as if undisturbed. His thoughts were divided between the responsibilities of his ship and the broader message these incidents carried. The Chinese had not fired a shot, had not crossed legal boundaries, but their intent had been clear. They had come to the English Channel not just to test, but to watch how the UK would respond. And so far, the response had been steady, but tentative. "We don't respond with noise," he murmured, more to himself than to the sea. "We respond with presence." As the Defender resumed her patrol course, keeping one eye on the water and one on the sky, no one knew what might come next. The question now wasn't just why China had appeared in these waters, but where they would appear next. As dawn broke over the English Channel, the HMS Defender remained at high alert, its sleek silhouette cutting through the early mist like a watchful sentinel. The crew moved with methodical precision, aware that beneath the surface calm, the tension from the last 72 hours still pulsed through every steel beam. Captain Arkwright had barely slept. In his quarters, he reviewed satellite imagery, transponder logs, and classified communications, trying to make sense of what was unfolding in real time. Patterns were emerging, but so were questions. The Chinese vessels had pulled back, yes, but not disappeared. At least 2 of them had been identified operating just beyond the channel's western approaches, intermittently appearing on radar, only to vanish again using low-frequency jamming and evasive maneuvers. These were not the habits of routine maritime transits. This was probing, cold, calculated pressure being applied in waters once thought untouchable. Below deck, in the cramped control hub of the ship's electronic warfare division, Lieutenant Aria Mason and her team were deep in signal analysis. For hours they had been chasing down strange bursts of data, encrypted pings, ghost signatures, and one particularly baffling looped transmission originating from the south. "They're not just watching us," she said, more to herself than the others. "They're listening, testing response time, measuring discipline." Mason knew the implications. Electronic warfare wasn't just support anymore. It was frontline combat. In today's shadow conflicts, whoever could manipulate the spectrum could rewrite the rules. She compiled her report with ruthless clarity and passed it directly to the bridge. It confirmed Arkwright's suspicions. The Chinese weren't just fishing for reactions, they were gathering targeting data. It wasn't lost on the crew that this behavior echoed Chinese maritime tactics seen in the South China Sea. Harassment, gray zone operations, aggressive shadowing. But here, on Britain's doorstep, it struck differently. Symbolically, it challenged sovereignty. Strategically, it poked at NATO's cohesion. Politically, it whispered that no sea was sacred anymore. And yet, through it all, the crew held the line. Chief Patel conducted another readiness review, cross-checking personnel assignments in case of an emergency maneuver or boarding. Down in the mess hall, McCarthy sat with a few junior sailors, explaining calmly how to decode General Quarters' alarms and what to do if comms went dark. His voice was steadier now. His nerves had hardened. That afternoon, the mood shifted again. A civilian research vessel, flagged under Malta, transmitted a distress signal. Mechanical failure, it said. But the signal was strange, abrupt, repeated 3 times, then silent. Niven ran it through the pattern recognition module and flagged it as suspicious. The Defender diverted course, prepared for the possibility of either a genuine emergency or a trap. As they approached the vessel, it became immediately clear. The ship had power. No signs of struggle, no crew visible. From a distance, it seemed to drift with intention. Arkwright didn't hesitate. "Send the drone. No one boards until we have eyes on the deck." The drone fed back live footage, empty decks, life rafts untouched. But at the stern, a small covered array pulsed with faint green light, an emitter of some kind. Aria Mason leaned in. "That's not for weather data. It's a low-range uplink, likely transmitting signals, could be a decoy or a relay." Suddenly, the emitter flared and cut out. Seconds later, the radar picked up 2 fast-moving contacts to the northeast. They were gone before any ID could lock in. But the message had been sent. This wasn't a mistake. The Chinese, or their proxies, had staged a phantom vessel just to test the Royal Navy's protocols and reaction speeds. It was a statement, cloaked as a mystery. Arkwright stood silently for a moment on the bridge, watching the calm waves ripple beneath the Defender. "They're mapping us like a chessboard," he muttered. "Not to strike, not yet, but to know exactly how we'll move when it counts." The senior officers convened for a final strategy session that evening. Tensions were high, but so was resolve. Intelligence was packaged for Whitehall, NATO command was alerted to the ship's findings, and standing orders were updated. The Defender would remain in the channel for another 48 hours before returning to port, its presence a declaration in itself. Before lights out, McCarthy returned to the chapel, this time not for fear, but for clarity. He was joined again by Patel, who gave him a quiet nod. "You did well," she said. "We all did. We didn't flinch." And that was the story. There had been no missile launches, no fire exchanged, no dramatic headlines, but something significant had happened. In the vast openness of the sea, where nations tiptoe between cooperation and confrontation, a message had been written without words, and the Royal Navy had answered it with calm defiance. As the stars settled over the channel once more, HMS Defender held its course, unyielding, watchful, and very much awake.